So many times we push down what we're afraid to confront and we focus, we use the excuse. I was living into, the role that I thought I was supposed to fulfill, right? And burying my head in the sand while at the same time until the universe was like, it's enough. So many times the universe hands us moments, people, nudges, whatever it is, when we're finally ready to really confront and look at the cycle that we have been perpetuating and to see the importance of really putting ourselves first. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Power in the Pause podcast. How are you all doing today? As a reminder, please do not forget to subscribe so that you do not miss a single episode. And I am asking you kindly to please leave a 5-star rating and a review so that more people can find this podcast. Well, without further ado, I am really looking forward to my conversation today and our episode with a dear friend of mine, Kat Polsinelli. Hello, Kat. How are you?
Hello, Wendy. I'm so excited to be here.
Oh my God, me too. You guys, I have had the privilege of being on Kat's podcast, and I'll tell you more about that when I make a more formal introduction of her. But I've been really looking forward to having her on my podcast so that you guys can learn more about her and understand why she was my go-to person for our conversation today, which is going to be all about how you too can reinvent yourself so that you can start leading with confidence and clarity. So let me share a little bit more about Kat with you all. So Kat's journey from performing on stage at the age of 10 to surviving a decade-long abusive relationship is one of profound resilience. She is now a motivational speaker, an MC, a best-selling co-author, and the host of Real Chat with Kat, which is a top 10% globally ranked podcast. Kat is dedicated to empowering others to turn their struggles into stepping stones for success. A former single mother at 16, Kat speaks with raw honesty about overcoming personal and professional hurdles, inspiring audiences to rise above challenges and embrace their inner strength. She is the founder of The Lotus Effect, and she is a business life integrator with Whitener Pros and helps entrepreneurs create balanced lifestyles. Kat, welcome to the show. So I always love to ask my guests, just given what this podcast is all about, how it is that you found your power in a pause moment.
I love that. When we talk about the power in the pause, I have to say that I honestly, if you'd asked me what on earth that even meant, like several years ago, I would have looked at you like you were crazy. We come from this society of like go, go, go constantly to where we're extremely drained. We end up getting sick or, whatever the case may be. And my pause moment, gosh, has honestly been several, but I feel like the biggest pause moment that I had in my life was a twofold. It was one when my children at the ages of 5 and 7 came into the living room during an argument with my abusive ex and got on to me, Mom, why are you so mean? This is your fault. And I was like, oh, wow. Okay, this can't go on. And I think that there was a huge realization moment for me that I couldn't have my kids growing up like someone they were around, which means something had to change. And the secondary one was probably about 5 or 6 years ago when my oldest one was getting into his teenage years. And I realized that him and I were being triggered by some of the same things. And it didn't make sense to me at the time, but it was a really interesting moment to like pause and be like, okay, I know that everyone says the teenage years are stressful and all this. I was like, but there's something else behind it. And so that's when I started diving into more about me. And when I really started learning about codependency and what it meant to be hyper independent and all these pieces. And then that's kind of when everything came back together. And that light bulb moment was like, oh, this is because of what my kids have been through. And they are suffering just like I am from unhealed wounds, except for they're still in this vulnerable stage and having a lot more hard of a time understanding why this is going on for them.
Yeah, it's so powerful. Isn't it so interesting how sometimes those pauses do come from our children, the power that they have in sort of making us just take a moment and just wake up almost, right?
Yeah.
And I know that you've had many of those wake up moments, and I'd love for you to share with our audience today a little bit more about your backstory and how it is that that has inspired your journey to where you are now, the work that you get to do, and how it is that you motivate other people, as I talked about beautifully in your intro, of how do you find the silver lining in the experiences that you have been through.
Yeah. So I want to take a gander back. There's a couple of different things in my background. The one thing that I always love to start with is, I actually grew up in a really loving home. My parents are still together. There wasn't a lot of yelling and screaming and stuff like that. I was very strong-headed and I had a lot of dreams and goals. When I surprised even myself getting pregnant at 16, that was kind of the first moment of like, I've got to do this. I have to make the changes. I have to fix the wrongs that I've done. And I shifted. And I was actually really proud of myself at the age of 18 for graduating a year early. I was second in my class. I graduated president of student council. I had a full-time job that I took my son to with me. And I was doing college at night. So I was feeling really good at that time. And that is about the time that my family and I really started butting heads because I knew how good I was doing, but a lot of my mother's old wounds and stuff, her and I we weren't meshing. And so I left and unfortunately made the decision to move in with a boyfriend at the time because he was the opposite of like everything I'd ever been around. Right. So at that time, I'm still a kid myself. I was super attracted to, you can talk to them like that. You mean you can do whatever you want? Like it was just, he was very inviting, very attractive. And so I kind of like sucked up to that. And that's what landed me in 10 years of an abusive relationship. And what I always love to tell people is no, the abuse did not start in the beginning. There were very, very small little bitty flags that I would not have ever understood at that time, from like making me late to my job to, begging me not to go out with friends, like things that I was like, oh, he wants to be around me, and not realizing that that was more of the controlling aspect. Now, fast forward, that led to me completely disconnecting from my family. My parents were not even allowed at the hospital when my second son was born when I was 19, to trying to rekindle that 7 years into that relationship, because at that point in time is when my kids came forth, made those two statements. And that's when I was like, something has to change. And so that kind of catapulted me into wanting to do something different. And it took another 2 years. It wasn't until we actually had a physical altercation, because a lot of my abuse was a lot more emotional and psychological. So you can't prove that. You can't call and have a conversation. Nobody's going to listen to you. And I was so isolated from everyone except for my job. Who was I going to tell anyway? And why would I let them know what I had been through for the fear of being shut down or shamed for what my kids had been through? After getting out of that relationship, by the graces of a young client at the time that happened to be working in the same department at the courthouse, the domestic violence center, and somehow put the pieces together, that was kind of the moment of like, okay, we get to start fresh. And I would love to say that like I jumped right into learning all the things about me. I didn't. I did what most people did. I got out of a horrible situation. I hyper focused on my kids. I hyper focused on my job, and I stuffed everything else down.
Right.
Several years later, like I said, when my son started to become a teenager was when I really started realizing that like, oh, I must have issues as well. And I started really diving into learning about how emotional traumas can affect you and the psychological traumas that are there. I found out I had PTSD. I found out that I had panic attacks. I didn't even know what those were. I was told that I had been brainwashed from all of the years of being controlled in this one specific area. But what that did do is it actually really opened up this space to be like, oh, so this isn't who I am. This is something else. And that's really what led me down the journey of like, I can redefine who I want to be. I can choose to be somebody totally different. I don't have to listen to what somebody else has told me year after year after year after year. And I really was catapulted into it when I realized I could also do that for my kids. My boys are now 20 and 16, and realizing that they were going through things just as much as I was really kind of put me out there to be like, oh my God, how many other people in the world are suffering with their own silent battles, feeling like nobody can know about it because of judgment, because of shame, or because they feel like no one else in the world would understand where they're coming from. And I realized I've always stood up for people ever since I was a little kid. So why not use this piece of me that I've been through to stand up for others who don't have a voice or don't want to come forward? And I can then start to make these changes and start having these conversations, because if we don't bring it to the surface, we can't expect anything to be different in this world. And I think it's time that we start talking about this a lot more so that other people realize that they can step out of the darkness as well.
Yeah, that's so powerful, Kat. And, you hit the nail on the head a couple of times, right? That so many times we push down what we're afraid to confront and we focus, we use the excuse, oh, we're in, the kids need me, like the kids come first, right? I mean, how many times have I done that even, right? I can totally relate to your story as well, because it was the same thing. Like, I knew something was wrong with my marriage. I decided to not really trust what I was feeling inside my body at the time. I kept my head down. I was a good mom. I went to work, was creating a career. It was like I was living into, the role that I thought I was supposed to fulfill, right? And burying my head in the sand, while at the same time, until the universe was like, it's enough, right? When you were talking, I was like, oh, I got chills when you said that this client of yours was the one who sort of was that mirror. And I feel like so many times the universe hands us moments, people, nudges, whatever it is, when we're finally ready to really confront and look at the cycle that we have been perpetuating, and to see the importance of really putting ourselves first. And I think that your story is so inspiring around how it was, especially at such a young age, as a single mother, raising two kids at the same time, of building your career. Like, what inspired you really to choose you is really how I want to frame it, right? It's like, how did you really start that process? Because I feel like, you know, transformation, people may think transformation looks one way, but it's messy. Like, let's be real. It's messy.
Oh, yeah.
And so I'd love for you to share a little bit more about that, because, the last thing I'll say, and then I'll be quiet so you can answer the question, is ultimately, like, I feel like people think like, oh, this book is going to help me. Oh, there's a free class on this topic. Okay, great. I'm going to go do that. And you realize that, like, these quick fixes, these Band-Aids were not going to work, right? And they were not helping you specifically with what your path looked like. So, okay, I'm going to be quiet now. So share about what that transformational path looked like for you that really enabled you to step into that reinvention of Kat.
Yeah, I love that you put the transformation is messy. Thank you so much for that. Let's start with that, okay? Transformation is totally messy, and you have to be ready and willing to do something different. Right. When I got out of that relationship, I stayed in the same job for another few years, and it actually wasn't until I started realizing that, I don't have to keep doing this. I can say no. I don't have to be the yes person. And that actually ended up costing me my job. I ended up having a moral dilemma with the doctor that I worked with at the time, because I didn't agree with what he was changing last minute on a patient of mine. And all I wanted to do was help other people. And so I literally was fired out of nowhere, with no idea that it was coming, no pay in the future. I had just bought a home. I had just moved in with an ex-fiance at the time. And that kind of hit me. And I was like, okay, well, obviously this isn't the path I'm supposed to choose. So you know what? I'm going to choose something completely different. And so I actually jumped into the world of real estate. I don't know why I ended up there. Right? Dumb. But what's really interesting is when I got into real estate, I started really, really paying attention to all of the small things. So what did I like about it? What was I learning from it? What was I seeing in myself as I was doing things? And I quickly kind of started shifting through that. I went from selling real estate to actually helping other agents who had been in practice a heck of a lot longer than I was, helping them with their business, to taking in a corporate position with that brokerage, which at the time was one of the largest in the world. And then I was like, okay, well, this is kind of cool. I'm just going to keep following this. This is a really interesting nudge. And every time that I paid attention to what I loved and what I didn't, and kept moving more toward the things I did, the more the doors started opening. And I was like, well, this is kind of cool. And I realized that, like, for the first time in my life, I didn't have to force it. I didn't have to tell someone, like, this is what I want and I'm looking for it and you should give it to me. I just felt into it. And the more that I felt into that feeling and the more that I just stayed in those feelings, the more that it was like, oh, here's this. Oh, here's this. And so, like, that ended up becoming the transformation, which led me into starting my own business, which was completely different than what it is now. And I literally have followed those nudges over the last several years of like, okay, I did a little bit of this, but I feel more inspired doing this. How can we do more of this? And that's what's pulled me into sharing more of my story. Because the more that I shared my story, the more that people were like, oh my gosh, I so relate. And I was like, I'm getting to help people like I've always wanted to do, but they're connecting with me because of the way I can personally share something that hurts so bad, but yet brings so much comfort to them. And that's what began this beautiful transformation. And now it's like, I am fully leaning in. I don't care if you tell me I shouldn't do it. If my body says this feels good, guess what? This is the direction we're going. But it's taken several years to really lean in and learn to trust those little feel good spots, those little intuition calls, because I didn't trust myself for the longest time. But I will say that there's no way anybody can change my mind now. And there's no way I'm turning back, because this era of my life is absolutely beautiful. Yes, there are still ups and downs, but I can handle it with so much more grace than I've ever been able to do.
That's amazing. Yeah. And your strength is just, well, I'll call it resilience, as you called it, even, right? Like, you've built up that resilience, right? And you've taken those steps. So I'm sure that there's a lot of people listening to our episode right now who are just like, God, I'm so ready, right? I'm so ready to just stop people pleasing. I am ready to stop feeling stuck. I'm ready to get off the hamster wheel, right? They're ready to take that step and really take charge of their life. What is one, two, however many small steps that you can inspire someone with, that they can start taking today to lead themselves down a path that feels fulfilling instead of feeling stuck and just in this place of burnout, maybe even, or, just not necessarily believing that this is possible for them?
Oh, I love this so much. There's a lot of people that are like, enough is enough. I'm tired of doing this. I want to do something different. I have to say to anyone that is listening, start small and be okay with it taking a little bit. We live in a society where we are so focused on, like, what can we do now? What's going to solve this? How can I get the return now? That is not how transformation happens. That is not how a lot of us go from being here in the dirt to coming up to where we're at. It is a journey. It is a process, and you have to love and enjoy that. So if I could tell anyone that is thinking of, I want to do something different, I feel it. First off, understand where that feeling is in your body. Write it down and lean into it. And then, as you continue to do things differently, as you start adding things, see if that feeling is in that same spot, because that's going to be your guide. That's the first step, is learning to know where those feelings are at, knowing what that feeling is, and remembering it, so that when you get to a crossroad and you make the decision of, well, I mean, I could just do this, and this is safe, but I don't want to, but like, this is calling to me, you start learning to follow those small nudges. And to anyone that's thinking about this, there may be some times where you get some really huge breakthroughs. I'm not saying they won't happen, but what I am saying is most of the time it's the little bitty things that we start to pay attention to that build up that momentum, so that we start to trust ourselves. And if you can trust yourself and learn to own the things that you have been through, that is going to catapult you in the direction you want to go.
Yeah, that's so powerful, Kat. And, I feel like we've touched on something so incredibly important that I feel like we've learned to numb, which is paying attention to our bodies, right? We've been so conditioned to listen to our minds and to listen to what our thoughts are. But really, our thoughts are being created from fear most of the time. And there are other thoughts creeping in that are not fear-based, but they're the whispers, right? This is what I call like your intuition, right? Like what you were saying, like pay attention to the sensations in your body to really understand and know the difference between what is coming from fear versus what I say is coming from your intuition. Your intuition is really that path that many of us neglect, disregard, ignore, because it's super unknown. And, it's interesting because I've been talking about this. God, this has come up like almost every day for like the last 2 weeks is this, and I'm going to say it again here on this episode. And I'm curious to hear, how I think this possibly applied to you in your journey, which is that so many times we are seeking evidence to help support more times than not the fear. But what we're doing is we are grasping on to evidence from a past version of ourselves that is not who we are today, nor is it the person that we want to be or that we see ourselves becoming. And what I'm hearing you also did is you really had to learn to retrain yourself, starting with your body, right? To then reframe your minds to be like, wait, no, this is old Kat. Like this is Kat from 10 years ago, 5 years ago, even 1 year ago. This is not Kat from today. And so I'm just curious as we kind of wrap this episode, how is it that you have really been able to embody the version of you that you are, that you want to be in paying attention to those sensations, in listening to those nudges, and what has come from it on the other side that I'm going to guess you couldn't have predicted, and it wound up being even more amazing on the other side?
Yes. So I agree with all the things. It definitely was choosing the small nudges, being very hyper aware of that, and then realizing that I want to do something different. For me, one of the things that really worked was knowing the thoughts that came through and then deciding, do I believe this or do I decide this is bull? Like that really was it. And then what I started doing was actually searching for the evidence to prove that old belief wrong. That is something that I do on a regular basis. So when I have that little thing that comes up that's like, I don't know about this, anything like that that I know is attached to something, I then make the decision. Is this something I choose to believe in? Or is this something that somebody else has told me? And if it's something that somebody else has told me, I will be like, okay, well, but I did this and then this happened. So obviously you aren't true because then this happened as well. I can literally go through and list those items to push myself in the direction that I know I want to go. And here's one of the things that I want people to know as well when it comes to like what you're asking me is choosing me in the future me. I do not directly define the future me. I leave it very open. I know the essence that I want. I know the feeling that I want. I know what I want to do for other people. And I leave that as an open, broad spectrum. Now that works for me because I don't feel like I'm tied into this little bitty hole. And I do change things up. So for some people that may not work. You may want to be super hyper focused. But what it's allowed for me is every time that I feel like I am going that direction, I can celebrate that. And that worked a lot better for me than saying, I have to make this amount. And once I make this amount of money, then I know it's going to take me to the next level. Because then if I didn't, but something else beautiful happened, I overshadowed that beautiful thing that happened. So that has worked really, really well with me is feeling into where I want to be and what I want my days to feel like and what I want my life to feel like. And then all the other stuff that's in it are bonuses. And so I get to celebrate both the small and the big things, but it kind of encompasses it all.
Yeah, no, I think you hit the nail on the head. So I always say, like, people hit goals, right? And if you like goals, that's great. But what you're saying and what I agree with is that it's the feeling that you're following, because the feeling is what is going to ultimately hit the goal. But guess what? The goal is not going to necessarily look the way that you thought it would, nor will the path to get there. And so
Yes.
as we kind of come back to sort of the theme of the episode today, right, is what I'm hearing you also say is that the more nudges, the more, breadcrumbs that you pay attention to, it becomes more clear. And as they sort of check off in your body of like, oh yeah, okay, this is right for me. This feels right for me. That ultimately that is what is going to build your confidence. And as someone who I know has gone on a journey on building that, what is a last thought that you want to leave with our audience today around how your path has built and sustained your ability to be confident in yourself, in your choices, in your thoughts, in those sensations?
What I feel like has built my inner confidence, and I'm going to say inner confidence because any one of us can have an outer confidence. When I jumped into the entrepreneurial space, boy, I could put a face on and you would think I was the most confident person in the world. And then I'd walk away and be like, oh. So there's a difference. And I want people to remember that there is a difference between the confidence that you push out to put a mask on, and there is a difference in what inner confidence is. And inner confidence is a love and acceptance of yourself. When you learn to love every bit of you, when you learn to give grace and forgiveness for the things that you went through because you just didn't know what you needed to know at that time, that is a type of confidence and resilience that no one can take away from you. And that shines brighter than anything else. That is what has catapulted me forward. And then when I do get to spaces of unknown or things that scare me, it's a lot easier to look inward and be like, okay, but we've done this before. But we've done that before. Let's lead with that. And don't get me wrong, I love outside praise. I love to hear I'm doing a good job. I love to hear that I touched somebody.
Sure.
But that became the secondary. That became the bonus. And that's how I continue to lead with my own confidence that keeps pushing me in a direction of what I consider the future me that I am striving for.
Amazing. Kat, I love you so much. I love what you stand for. I love your journey. You are such an inspiration to so many people. And I want to make sure that everybody listening knows where they can find you. So, where are the best places? And everybody, just so you know, everything Kat's about to tell you is in the show notes. So they are clickable. So you can just go into the show notes and immediately go follow Kat and to find her. So
Thank you, Wendy, so much. So you can find me on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram, all at the Lotus Effect Coach. The easiest way to follow and absorb my content. And then, of course, Real Chat with Kat, which is on all the major platforms. Definitely go find Wendy's episode, which I believe actually is episode 119, so that you can hear the beautiful conversation that we got to have as well.
amazing. Kat, thank you for being here. And everyone, thank you so much for tuning into today's episode. You know that with this podcast, my ultimate vision and my mission with this episode and every single one that I put out into the world is to help each and every one of you to find your own power in the pause. So I hope that today gave you that inspiration. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'm sending you all so much love and light always. Mwah. Bye, everybody.